Hi, I'm Ron James. I'm here with George Knapp, who is a co-host of Coast to Coast AM and a very illustrious journalist throughout the Southwest. George has broken stories regarding paranormal events, ufology, and much more, and he's done just an amazing amount of work for all of these genres. George, we're really delighted that you're here, and thanks again for all the things that you've done over your career.
Well, thank you.
We're here at the X Conference in D.C., and the subject here obviously is disclosure. How do you think that the revelation of an alien presence, well, first off, do you believe that we do have an alien presence here on planet Earth?
Well, alien in a generic sense. There's some other kind of intelligence operating. I think the evidence, if you look at the totality of it, is pretty much overwhelming. What that alien presence is, that's another matter. E.T., maybe, maybe not. Maybe there's some other explanation for it. I don't really know, and I don't think anybody else does either.
So you're open to the idea that maybe there's an interdimensional or even possibly creatures or other beings here on the planet that are here that we just don't know about, maybe underground or...
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to all those suggestions. You have to look at it with a healthy dose of skepticism, of course. You start with the basics, and that is there is another intelligence that's been interacting with humans for a long time. Well, we can prove it in a variety of different ways. Tens of millions of people have seen it over the years in one form or another over the centuries throughout human history. On every continent, in every country, in every culture, in different guises, under different names, but it's there and it's real, and it has interacted with us at one level or another for a very long time. The evidence is overwhelming, I think, in other ways, too. Government documents, for example, U.S. government documents, Russian, Brazilian, British, papers that were written to be seen in classified and secrecy, which document that something really is going on, and it's not ours, it's from somewhere else. So I think the evidence is real, that there's some kind of intelligence that we're dealing with. What it is, I don't know.
Now, do you think that the government is actually going to be able to come to the public and disclose what they know?
No, I do not. I mean, in some degrees, they already have. Project Blue Book ended, its files are open. It's comparable to what has happened in Britain in the last couple of years, opening up their Ministry of Defense files. It's comparable to what's happened in Brazil as well. And these are low-level files, I believe, case studies, incidents, things of a non-classified nature that don't necessarily impact on national security. Where the other stuff is, I don't know. At the end of Project Blue Book, when that project was canceled, and it was nothing more than a public relations exercise to begin with, rather than a scientific study.
Sure.
But when that was over, if you might recall, there's something called the Bollinger Memo. This memo put out by a general that said, okay, we're done with Project Blue Book, but now we can continue to collect all the national security cases, and they'll still go to where they've always gone. We don't know where that is, but we know that they have a place like that where the really sensitive cases and incidents go. I suspect that there is still a collection effort at some point, that somewhere there's a gigantic room full of data that the public has not been able to see. A lot of that stuff has been made public, some of it hasn't. But if we are waiting for a day when our government comes forward and says, aliens are real, they're here, we're going to be waiting a long time. In my opinion, that day will never happen.
And now, is that primarily because they know a lot less than some of the cover-up conspiracy people believe they know, or is it because they're just flat out not going to tell us?
I think there's a variety of reasons. One is very mundane and human. There was a congressional investigator that I worked with her a number of years who had highest security clearances. He was looking into the story about Area 51, and he was looking into the possibility that a cover-up existed, that it had existed for a long time. The possibility was that millions, maybe tens of millions of dollars that otherwise would have gone into legitimate national security programs for our military, for the defense of our country, had been siphoned away from these legitimate programs and used to keep this cover-up going, to perpetuate a conspiracy of sorts, to deny information to the American public and to the world. And he told me at the time, he said, look, if this story turns out to be true, these people are going to go to jail. They will go to jail. So that's a very down-to-earth reason why the cover-up could be maintained. I think the other reason would be, look, they've been lying about it for a long time. Even if they didn't steal money to keep the lie going, they painted themselves into a corner and don't really know what to say. And then you get to this point. When you talk about disclosure, disclose what? That aliens are real? I'm not sure anybody knows the true answer to this. Even though there might be a gigantic storehouse of information about UFO sightings, I'm not sure anyone really knows where they're from, why they're here, what they want. Those are the big questions. We've been studying UFOs for 60 years. And I don't think we're one step closer to knowing the answer to any of the really central big questions.
So in the time that you've been reporting on these stories, all the way back to doing work with Roswell and Area 51 and some of the other things that you've been involved in, you've never been approached by somebody at a high level and told to either stop what you're saying or that there's something to this, but you don't need to talk about it. Has there ever been that elusive private conversation, that thing that everybody thinks happens to people who get too close?
Oh, not once. I wish I had the knock on the door. That would be great, because that would be confirmation that I'm on the right track, that I've ruffled some feathers somewhere. It has never happened. I've been able to report whatever I want about this stuff since the beginning. Now that suggests two things. Number one is that there is no one out there who cares about these stories, that it's not affecting national security, that there is no MJ-12 who's concerned about the truth getting out, or number two, that I'm doing something that they appreciate, that they're okay with it. You know, there is a basis of thought that maybe there is a controlled release going on, that disclosure does not have to happen all at once, that it happens incrementally, that the prevalence of UFO stories and UFO material and ideas in movies and books and television, that it's part of a controlled release, a gradual acclimation process, as opposed to a all at once, let's spill the beans kind of a thing. And I sort of lean in that direction. I don't know if it's on purpose or not, but it certainly is happening.
Now, recently, Barack Obama introduced a new initiative for NASA and also to relegate a lot of the space research and development to private industry. And there's some speculation that maybe that is to set the stage for the release of secret technology through supposed development by private industry. Do you think that that might be possible?
It's possible, but I would say in general that it is the people in the UFO community have vivid imaginations, and they see realities and conspiracies all over the place, whether they really exist or not. That'd be great. But you know what? Barack Obama has a lot more on his plate than extraterrestrials or UFOs. And if his administration were to raise this issue, to say, hey, you know, we got to get the truth out about UFOs, he'd be a laughingstock. His presidency would be over. Politically, it would be a disaster. People would laugh at him. He couldn't get anything else done. He has some real serious problems. Our country has really serious problems. This is not what they need to be talking about.
Well, there are those that would say that there's 70% of the population in some surveys do believe that the government is lying about some kind of extraterrestrial presence, and the percentage of people who actually believe in life on other planets is even higher than that. So do you think really that he would be scorned by the mass population, or just by the people that have an interest in keeping that information?
I can tell you what's happened to me, or 70% of the people in Las Vegas who believe in this stuff, and I get scorned every day of the week. Every time I am mentioned in any context, somebody is mad at me about some other story that has nothing to do with UFOs. They bring up the UFO thing as a bludgeon to hammer me with, to decrease my credibility, what they perceive to be decreasing my credibility. Anytime, for example, I did some stories about firefighters and their salaries last week, revealing the salaries of firefighters and police officers. On our website, I get hammered over and over again, well, hey, he's the UFO guy, how serious can this be? I know in my own life what it's been, that people try to use that against me, and I'm a much lower level than Barack Obama. I can only imagine what it would be like in Washington were he to open that door. It'd be the end of his presidency.
Wow. Now, has this kind of stereotyping decreased over time, or is it just pretty much the same as it's been since you first started breaking these stories?
I would say it's pretty much the same. It's been the same way since the beginning, not just my career, but since the beginning of the UFO, the modern era. I mean, you know, in 1953, the CIA convened what's called the Robertson Panel, and they discussed it. And they talked about, look, let's look at these UFO cases. You know, we don't think that UFOs represent a threat to national security, but the continued reporting about UFOs is a threat. Therefore, let's institute a program to strip UFOs of their aura of mystery. And that's when they talked about debunking, the laughter curtain, the ridicule factor. And whether or not that program was ever instituted or not, it's in effect what's happened. Because people do laugh at people who report UFOs. 9 out of every 10 persons who sees a UFO or has some experience like that doesn't report it at all. And the fear factor is a major part of that.
Now, I notice a very healthy skepticism in your approach, and I think that's fantastic. But I also know that you have a very good relationship with Bob Lazar over time, and he is one of the people who says that he was inside Area 51 and has seen the extraterrestrial vehicles. So how do you balance that? Because I notice that from a journalistic standpoint, you're very fair and balanced, but also there's got to be this kind of dichotomy happening inside you and surrounding your work.
It's not hard. It's like you go into it like any other news story. You treat it the same way. You have an open mind about it, but you have a healthy degree of skepticism because people do lie. People have their own agendas. So you go into it, it's like Missouri, the motto for Missouri, show me, you know. I'm open to anything if you can prove it to me or give me some reasonable facsimile of proof, and that's how I approach that. There's a lot of support for Bob Lazar's story. Ultimately, we can't say that what he said is true. We don't have the flying saucers that he said were stored out there. We can't kick the tires and inspect them. So to some extent, you have to take his word for it and the word of other people. But I have more than 24 other people who work at Area 51 in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s who have bits and pieces of the same story. So that's why I give it a certain degree of credibility.
Now, for people that aren't familiar with what you do in Las Vegas now, tell us a little bit about the station that you're working with now and what their policy is and how they regard you and how much leeway they give you in continuing to report these kind of stories.
I am the chief investigative reporter at KLAS TV. That's the CBS affiliate in Las Vegas. It's the oldest TV station in Nevada. The first licensed station in our state, created in 1953. It has always been the news leader in our community. It has many more viewers than the largest newspapers in Nevada have. And I am in a unique position because I've been there so long, because I had done so many other kinds of stories, organized crime and pollution and government corruption, things of that sort, and it developed a certain amount of credibility with the audience and with my managers. I was allowed to go after this. Now, do they want me to do a UFO story every week? No. Am I allowed to pursue it if I think it's good and interesting? Yeah. But I mean, it isn't that often that a story comes up that has a Nevada angle that would merit it based on where I am. I'm not a national reporter, I'm a local reporter. So it has to have a Nevada or Las Vegas angle for me to go after it. But when it does, if it seems worthwhile, I have the freedom to go after it. And I'm unique. It's because I've been there a long time, they let me do it.
Now, how do you balance your solid journalistic work with the CBS affiliate with also being co-host of Coast to Coast, which certainly has a leaning of the paranormal and the ufologies?
The same thing, again, is that my employers trust me to do the right thing. And even though I am on a radio show that explores a lot of really weird topics, I'm not committing myself to those. I'm not saying because I'm interviewing you about XYZ that I believe it with my whole heart. I'm questioning you about it. We have somebody on the program with a weird point of view or an odd story to tell. I ask them about it. I let them tell the story, but I don't necessarily have to openly embrace it.
Now, did you have to really go through a strong decision process and a lot of thought before you decided to take the gig with Coast to Coast?
Not really, because I've been down that road.
Sure.
I've been down that road and covered this material. It's fun. It's 4 hours. You can cover a lot of material. You can go over a lot of stuff, and it's to have the luxury of that much time to explore a guest, a book, an idea is great. It's a lot better than a 5-minute TV report in some ways because you can cover a lot more ground and get more in depth. So when I told my news managers, they said okay, because they trust me. I'm sure they've probably had to think about it sometimes if they listen late at night to the strange stuff we cover. Was this a good idea or not? But so far they haven't told me to stop.
That's good. Let's wrap up with the disclosure subject again. And my question is, if there is a huge revelation to humanity that there is an extraterrestrial presence, if this were to happen, be it through a political outlet or literally a flying saucer landing in the middle of some place and a revelation being made that way, how broad are the implications on the future of humanity and our society?
It really depends on what the announcement is. A UFO landing on the White House lawn is going to be profound. It would be the most profound thing in human history. The acknowledgement that there is another intelligence, that there is somebody else like us out there. It rewrites everything. It rewrites human history, and that would be profound.
Now, do you feel like it rewrites our whole definition of spirituality and all of the different elements that make us human and our belief system?
Doesn't have to. Who knows? But we don't know. When people talk about disclosure, I ask, disclose what? If it's just that, hey, there are people like us living on other planets. People, we can handle that. Humans can handle that. We've been conditioned to deal with it through books and movies for a long time. If you're disclosing something else, maybe not. Skinwalker Ranch, we developed the idea that maybe there are other dimensions, that are intelligences that can interact with us, that can come into our reality and leave at will. They can see us, they can hear us, they monitor us on a regular basis, but we can't see them. Now let's say your disclosure is, hey, by the way, there's other intelligence, they live all around us. When you're taking a shower, they can watch you. When you're sleeping at night, they watch you. You want to disclose that? Because I'm telling you, you think people would freak out with aliens? They would really freak out at that. So, disclosure, I'm all for it. Depends on what you're disclosing.
So you actually support the idea that maybe there's some things we just don't need to know?
I'm not saying that. I mean, I'm a journalist, so it's my job. People have a right to know. I want to know everything, as I'm sure you do. I acknowledge the idea, though, that not necessarily has to be a good idea that everybody knows everything. I don't want everyone to have the formula for the atomic bomb at home, And I think that there are some things, some realities that could be disclosed that would be so profoundly disturbing that maybe it would have dramatic and irreversible effects on our social institutions. Aliens are here abducting us. They're creating a race of hybrids. They're living on some other planet or in some other reality. These are your children. They're taken away from you. I think people would freak out. I do.
If you can say anything to other journalists about taking the initiative to look into these kind of stories, it's almost like a taboo in mainstream journalism. And there's a mentality that there's a heavy price to be paid. But if you could advise other journalists on having the courage to do it or not, what would you say? What do you see happening in journalism today, and how can we improve it?
Well, there is a taboo. It's sort of an unwritten taboo, and these the big guys in particular, the mainstream reporters at some place like 60 Minutes or the New York Times, they won't do it because they see it as nothing but a downside for their career. Now, maybe I'm the anomaly in this regard, and I've taken some shots over the years, but I've survived, and if anything, it's probably been good for me, my career, at least locally. I think it's probably put a ceiling on where I can go because of perceptions at the network level, but I'm okay with that. I would say to them, look, this is a legitimate story, and it's not hard to follow. There's a big learning curve in the beginning where you've got to figure out who's legitimate, what cases make sense, where you got to separate wheat from the chaff. And while 90%, 95% of it is nonsense or honest misidentifications of prosaic phenomena, that remaining core of information is profoundly interesting. And there are ways you can honestly pursue it as a reporter without giving up any of your journalistic standards, to pursue it the same way you do any other story. You follow the paper trail, you interview witnesses, you see if you can corroborate what they're saying, and you tell the story. It's like the journalist's ethical imperative. Get the story, get it right, and tell it no matter who it helps or who it hurts. That would work in this regard. And sometimes I feel awfully lonely pursuing this because there aren't many people in my line of work that are doing it. On the other hand, I do have sort of the area to myself. There's not a lot of competition for it.
Now, the History Channel recently did the Ancient Astronaut series, and that's been regarded as a well-researched, well-documented, and courageous piece of material. It was also their most highly rated show. So do you think that the media is helping, that there's some kind of evolution happening here, where these ideas are becoming more mainstream and being advanced with a larger degree of truth?
I think there's some truth to that there is sort of disclosure happening in incremental levels going around the media, going around science, and going around the government. And it is so common on the History Channel and elsewhere that it's almost a given. There's so much of this stuff. I sometimes worry about UFO overload, that maybe we're getting too much, so much that people don't think about it. There are so many stories about aliens and ETs and UFOs and flying saucers that and they're presented by the History Channel, and they're done very well. But the fact is that it's always going to be viewed as entertainment. Until it's on 60 Minutes, until it's on the front page of the New York Times, it's not news. It's still entertainment. And I just don't see it having the same kind of impact. Well, I can address this, is that, in a lot of ways, the Russian experience is similar to our own. Their government told them the same thing. There's nothing to this. In fact, they blame it on us. we blamed a lot of UFO sightings on the Russians. It must be Russian rockets, and the Russians blamed it on us. Or they blamed it as a plot of American capitalism to interfere with fundamental views of Russian citizens for a long period of time during the Cold War. And the Russians discouraged their own scientists, in public anyway, from discussing it, from studying it, whereas behind the scenes, those same officials who were saying, keep your mouth shut, don't talk about this, were asking these scientists to study things like Roswell, to study UFO sightings, and to find out what was going on. And the Russian government reached the same conclusion ours did. Something really is flying around up there. It's from somewhere else. It can fly circles around everything that we have. In one instance that I personally uncovered and investigated, UFOs hovered over a Russian ICBM base in 1982 and somehow entered the launch control codes in these missiles. The missiles were enabled. They were ready to go. And then the UFO, which had been flying around over the base for 4 hours, went poof, disappeared. The control panel went back to normal. The Russian colonel who came in to investigate this said they couldn't find anything that caused it. It had never happened before. It never happened since, but they took it very seriously. And they took it as a message from the UFOs that this might be your most important weapon system, but it doesn't impress us. The Russians have had an ongoing interest in UFOs. They have studied it at the highest levels of their government. They had the biggest UFO study in history, 10-year long. Every unit in the vast Soviet military empire was required to fully investigate and report anything anomalous, ball of light, UFO, and send it all to this one central location. And we found the guy and had the first interview with the guy who was in charge of it. They don't know what UFOs are either. They just know something is going on that they can't explain.
So George, with the advent of like YouTube and all of the different ways to get information out, everybody's got a video camera, everybody could be a producer, and millions of people are actually watching these videos. How does that change the landscape in relationship to the mainstream media and the dissemination of information?
Well, there's good and bad in that everybody can now be their own video producer. Everyone who's got a computer is suddenly a researcher. Everyone is a ufologist who wants to call himself a ufologist. With the technology that's available, Photoshop abilities, anyone can manufacture their own UFO video. And it complicates the situation because you can never tell what's real and what isn't. In addition, while I encourage citizen journalism and for people to write their own blogs and get active and write stuff and cover things, there's still no substitute for experience. You got to have actual journalists working on some of this stuff as well. I don't see any likelihood that mainstream journalists, network level journalists, are going to be taking this more seriously. I am encouraged that independent producers, your team, for example, some of the stuff that I've done independently of my employer, that takes place. You could hope that those kind of productions, if they're done well, would encourage somebody like 60 Minutes or a Nightline or 48 Hours to dig into this topic. It hasn't happened yet, but it still could.
Do you have a sense that academia is totally ignoring a subject that should be on the front burner?
Absolutely, they're ignoring it. And I can give you examples of it. This past spring semester, I was asked to teach a class at UNLV about UFOs and conspiracies and journalism, how you would approach these topics as a journalist and teach it to future journalists. UNLV initially said, yeah, great, especially since I had a sponsor who was going to pay for my work and my time and bring guests and everything in.
Wow.
And then they realized, wait a second, this is about UFOs here. This guy's going to be talking about Roswell and flying saucers and cover-ups. You know, let's just think about it here. We'll okay the class, but we want you to make sure you have that you address other things other than conspiracies, that you bring in skeptics who don't believe any of this is true, which I don't mind having balance and things like that. I did worry that their reticence to accept the class as I described it was the beginning of the end, and it ended up being the end as well, because the class didn't happen. Academia, you would think on a university campus of all places, you could talk about anything. That's what it's there for. Free thought, free expression, explore ideas, challenge conventional paradigms. That's what it's for. And it doesn't exist, not on this topic. I remember when I was producing this documentary, I was in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I went to Vanderbilt University to interview this astronomer, prominent guy, well-respected, PhD. I asked him about UFOs. Well, you know, that UFO stuff, there's nothing to it. There's no evidence. I said, well, how much have you read about it? He says, I've read everything that's appeared in the academic press. I'll tell you, it'd take you about 5 minutes to read everything that's been in the academic press. You can't publish an article about UFOs. I know PhD guys, Nobel Prize quality guys who have written articles that are rejected just because of the subject matter. Dr. Brian O'Leary was at Cornell with Carl Sagan. He was accepted for the astronaut program. He's a brilliant man.
Sure.
He wants to talk about this stuff, and it's completely discouraged. He can't get an article published in a scientific journal because they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to deal with it, and it's bankrupt. It's ridiculous. It's shameful is what it is.
No, I've interviewed Dr. O'Leary, and he's in a couple of my
Yeah, he's a good guy.
George, I just
too.
really want to thank you for sitting with us for a while
Sure.
and really covering these topics. I know a lot of people are interested in what you have to say. Thank
Sure.
you.
Right.